Well, welcome to RUC people, and this morning I'm really happy to be joined by Glynn, who is a relatively recent member at RUC, but has a really interesting story to share with us. So, welcome, Glynn. Great to have you with us.
Russell.
Okay, Glynn. So, take us back to the start. Where are you from originally? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your family.
So, I come from the northern suburbs in Cape Town. So I'm a Cape Townian, and I grew up in Ravensmead. The way Cape Town is, many people in this side of Cape Town don't even know that side of Cape Town, but people have heard of Belleville or Paddo. And so where I grew up is close to Belleville and Paddo, in an area called Ravensmead. And my family come from different places, eventually settled. My paternal grandparents eventually settled in Ravensmead, and that's where I grew up. With we all lived relatively close to each other. My grandparents, all of their children, and their children's children. So I was always surrounded by my cousins, and my uncles and aunts and my grandparents. Where I grew up. Yeah.
And big family, parents, siblings?
Big family. So my grandparents on both sides, both had 5 kids. On my maternal side, we got 23 cousins.
Wow.
And on my paternal side, we are 13 cousins. So on my paternal side, I'm the eldest, which has always been quite an interesting texture in my experience, because it constantly gets mentioned, and there's all sorts of expectations and dreams that comes with an eldest and responsibilities. So I'm an eldest sibling, I'm an eldest cousin, and quite nicely sort of like groomed into that role by family. So I've got a very, very big family. Both sides of my family are very religious. And of course, church-going people. Now the extended family, worships together, and so socializes together, and you get to see your family all the time. And that was my upbringing for the first 20 years of my life, until I left Cape Town and moved far away to Mpumalanga.
And you said the family was part of church, in particular denominations?
Yes. So I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And it's quite special on my paternal side that we had been Adventists for 4 generations. So my great-grandfather was one of the, you can say one of the, not founding fathers, but he was very, very active in establishing the church and church schools in Cape Town within the colored community. And so I was brought up in that tradition. Both my mother and father's side are Seventh-day Adventists. Very, very church-going. I mean, from when I was born until the last week before I left Cape Town, in church every week. A really, really wonderful, immersive Christian experience, church-going experience, being involved in church things all the time.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so, where did you go to school? Was childhood, school years happy for you?
Yes. So my primary school was very, very happy for me. I spoke about my great-grandfather. So he was one of the parents that helped start the Riverside Primary School, which was an Adventist church school. And so he helped start it. My grandfather attended it. Both my parents attended it. I attended it. So I knew all the teachers, because all of them were also church-going people within the community. And so going to primary school was basically like just an extension of community life for me. And then I continued in church school until about standard 7, which is grade 9 today, in Mowbray for those 2 years. And then for the first time after that, I went to a state school, which was massive, and I attended Settlers High School in Belleville.
Okay.
And that was a completely different experience in terms of schooling, but also in terms of academic and extramural opportunity. That was my school life.
And during those years, were sort of stirrings of a future starting to emerge for you? You know, did you have a sense of what you're interested in, where your talents and interests lie, and you know what a future vocation might look like for you?
So what I professed as my future studies had nothing to do with my interests at all. But I don't think that it's a unique story globally. You have a family that comes from, that struggles from a working class background. Also a background of dispossession. My paternal family were very, very affected by the Group Areas Act.
Yes.
And that involved a lot of economic setback and economic loss.
Yes.
But basically this global struggle of economic stability, and then you sort of like bump into the middle class. I was a strong student, always had been, and no one of my previous generations had ever done university-based tertiary education. And so there was an obvious opportunity for me out of academic ability. But then the country was also changing, and so there were more opportunities for me. And so because I was, from when I was in primary school, academically achieving, it was like, you should become a doctor. And being quite a compliant and pleasing child, especially being groomed as an eldest child, was like, yes, okay, I'll study medicine. And then of course everyone talks about Glynn's going to study medicine. It never happened. I'm glad it never happened. And then one day I went on one of these career day things to what was then Cape Technicon, which is now CPUT, and I saw nature conservation. So as I said, I was a very, very, very dedicated schoolgoer, pupil. One day I bunked, and I went through to CPUT. I bunked in my uniform, and I went to CPUT, and I went to go and apply to study nature conservation. And so not all bunking is bad. And then I came home and said to my mom, I've decided to study this. She had to process it all. We didn't really know what nature conservation was because we didn't really grow up going to national parks. Many of those opportunities were limited for our people.
Yes.
But it appealed to me, and I studied it and learned what I would be doing as I studied. And so that was on campus full time for 2 years. And then my third year was an internship year. And then I got posted to Kruger National Park.
Wow.
Very far away from home.
Big dream job for a lot of people.
For a lot of people. I mean, I didn't have the dream because I didn't know about that. But that's where I was posted, and I went. And it was difficult to be away from home, to be far away from home.
What was your role at Kruger National Park?
So all the students that went there became night drive students. That was how we economically justified our presence there. And so we worked for the tourism department, and at night we would do these drives in these big trucks taking the tourists around. And during the day we had time to do our projects and our studies and get experience and go out with the rangers, whatever teams were going out to get experience and to write up our experience into various projects. And then at the end of that year, you graduate. You submit that, it's graded, and then you graduate with your diploma. And then I got another opportunity to get work there, sort of got a foot in the door in my internship year. And eventually I stayed there for 9 years.
At Kruger?
At Kruger National Park.
Wow. I know it's enormous. I know some people will tell me Kruger National Park is about the same size as the country of Belgium, so it's
yes.
Vast. Which part of the park were you?
I was in the south, in the main camp in Skukuza.
Yes, okay.
And because I joined the Scientific Services Department, or the Research Department, which was based at the headquarters of the park, which was Skukuza. So I worked in that department, and while I was working, continued to study. And so then I did my degree part-time. Also at CPUT, I did my degree in nature conservation.
From distance?
From distance, yes.
Wow.
And then I obtained my degree and studied more. And then swapped from the technology university to academic university, the traditional stream. And then I actually did my master's degree in science, specializing in ecology.
Okay.
Yeah.
At UCT, was it?
No, at WITS.
At WITS.
Yes, at WITS University. Yeah.
Wow. people growing up in Cape Town, where we're all surrounded by such incredible natural beauty, mountain and sea, that it's maybe a fertile ground for developing conservationists. Was that something as a kid you were always interested in nature? And,
Yes.
And so to then make it a career must have been like a dream come true.
Yes. But a lot of us, you're a kid. You see things on documentaries, you see things on TV. And you don't quite know what you're getting yourself into with any career.
Yes.
But that's the story for everyone. When you study something, you either like it or you don't. You either see opportunity in it or you don't.
Wow.
I saw opportunity in it and made use of the opportunity.
Great. And did you see a natural link? And I guess this is a question that might be relevant even as you've got older and matured into different other aspects of life. But a natural linkage between this faith upbringing and conservation, God the creator and all that.
Absolutely.
Were those linkages there for you?
Absolutely.
Part of your faith journey.
It was. The way I understood nature then, I hardly even use the word nature now. Things have become so technical. The more I learned, the more I got into it, and so the terminology changes. It was something my mom was quite taken with, and something when people found out that I was not studying medicine, and they were like, nature conservation, what on earth is that? And then she said, well, you'll be continuing Adam's work. And its work you can continue in heaven.
Exactly.
And that spun the whole thing, and people were like, wow. Because there's certainly going to be no doctors in heaven. Or they're going to be unemployed.
So how has this passion sort of played itself out in future years? Those early years at Kruger, then what happened after that in terms of your vocation?
Well, I learned a lot in Kruger. Not just about those ecosystems, but about other ecosystems and how ecosystems work. And how humans and communities interact with those ecosystems. I eventually got an opportunity to get a transfer to Cape Town. And they were busy establishing a research center here for sandparks. And so I was part of that establishing team. It was a small team, small center. Now it's quite big and flourishing. And I helped build that up for 5 years and worked there. So then that was my 14-year journey with sandparks. Then I got an opportunity. I was getting a bit, itchy feet. One organization for such a long time. I was still young. I got an opportunity for a job in Durban. And then I moved there and I worked for eThekwini municipality in the environmental unit. Didn't have a great time. Lots of personal struggles too. And I also didn't feel at home. And this would become a massive part of my story of self-discovery. And the happy reality that I have now was being at home and what home is. And so I was there for 3 years, also learned a lot about myself, a lot of failures, a lot of struggles, a lot of professional learning too. And then also learning about, yes, this is a good path to follow, but there's something else in me that I always had, but that now is bursting to come out and to be formalized and to be lived out. I left that job, gave that up, cashed in my pension.
Wow, okay.
Don't do that. But cashed it in, moved back home to Cape Town, and then studied education full-time on campus at UCT. Then I became a teacher, a high school biology teacher.
Quite a shift.
Yes. And then I started teaching at various contract jobs. I taught at 3 different schools over a 3-year period, including a local school here in Rondebosch, Rustenburg Girls High School.
Okay.
And that was my last school that I taught at. I became gravely ill. I was admitted to hospital. I underwent treatment and several surgeries over an 8-week period in Grootersdorp Hospital. So when I came out, I was, of course, recuperating. I was very, very, very ill. I had shrunk to a skeleton. But even when I was ill and barely walking, and quite, not bedridden, but quite get focused physically.
Mm.
I was applying for work. And I found that at the time that not being employed, it felt shameful. And it's not.
So many people in this country are in that position.
Yes. And a friend of mine that I saw this week, he came to me and said he had been teaching abroad in China. And he told me that we hadn't seen each other for over a year. I didn't realize he'd been back. And we met up and he said to me, he's been unemployed and how absolutely rotten his life had been because of that, because he wasn't employed. How when a friend introduces us to a new person, we say, this is Russell, he works at Pick and Pay. They know nothing about you, but now they know your employment. It has actually got so little to do with who you are. We don't introduce each other to new people. Who is this person? How do you know this person? And then I gave him some comfort and I said, when I was ill, and I felt this deep sense of shame of being unemployed, I had the time to take stock and to be deeply reflective. And I saw how my family and social support community rallied around me. And the interactions when they came to visit me were the same as what they'd always been. Yes, of course, there were people coming to see me because they were very concerned about my health. But the conversations were the same. It was the same Glynn inside.
Yes.
And then I said to him, you know what, I realized, because those people didn't leave my life. They had never been interested in me because of where I was employed. It had never been an issue with the people that cared for me.
Exactly.
I was still the same Glynn. And so I said to him, it's actually a very small part. Being employed at all, or being employed in a certain position for a certain institution. For the people that care for us, it doesn't matter. And that was a very important learning, and I'm glad that I was able to share it, and it comforted him. And he said, thank you, I had never thought about it that way. And I said to him, when I met you, these were the things I liked about you. And they're still there. And I value you in exactly the same way, because you are the same person today. And it helped him. But it was a personal learning that I had to arrive at. But then, even when I was ill, getting back to what I was saying, I was sitting, applying for jobs. Applied everywhere, applied to many schools, applied anything education related, even conservation or biodiversity sector related. As I became more able-bodied, I was able to attend interviews. This is South Africa, it's difficult to get employment. I attended probably over 30 interviews. I wasn't successful at those jobs. Then I got a job, just a short maternity leave job. Someone was going on maternity leave and I was filling in that education NGO that did work in Cape Flat schools. And I learned a lot about education, about realities out there, about opportunities and constraints, and about, it's just reaffirmed how important education work is. But not just traditional education work in schools, teaching children. There I was doing young teacher development, students studying their education degrees, interacting at that level. When that came to an end, 3 days before that contract came to an end, and I was facing unemployment again, I got a call from Physical Museums where I had applied for an education post. And they said to me, can you come for an interview quickly? I went for the interview. They said, okay, you've been successful. Can you start on Friday?
Wow.
I said, yes, okay, I'll be there. And signed on, and I'm still there now. And it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. So I do education. I'm an educator for Ezekiel South African Museums, based at the Ezekiel South African Museum, which most people will know. It's at the top of the gardens. The one with the big whale skeleton. Yes, that's where I'm based.
Wow.
I am a person, even though biodiversity, nature conservation, environmental awareness and consciousness, a deeper understanding of ecosystems and how we fit in, the damage we do, the great things we do, and how we've always been a part of the ecosystem. Heritage and identity and history, particularly social history, has always been a deep passion of mine. In high school, if I had the opportunity to follow my personality, I would have studied history at the university. My guidance counselor at the time told me, there aren't jobs in there, don't study them. Also, when I wanted to apply for nature conservation, he said to me, I don't think you should apply for that. I'm just trying to help you, but it's mainly white people that get those jobs. So maybe you should apply for something else. But I would have studied history if money was not a constraint. So that's always been important to me, identity, history, and even like an ancestral sense of place.
Okay.
The way we connect with not just the people and the language, but the landscapes.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that even if I had had a wonderful time in Kruger National Park, I was in my 20s. Everything's wonderful in your 20s. You still have lots of serotonin.
And a whole future to look forward to.
And a whole future, you know. But then in terms of developing my adult self, knowing my adult self as that unfolds, I found that when I was in the Cape, and when I say the Cape, I don't specifically mean where I grew up, I don't specifically mean the city of Cape Town. When I was in the Cape, I made sense. I made sense.
Yeah.
Because it is where not only I came from, but where my people come from, my ancestors come from.
There's a rootedness and
There's a rootedness and there's a, not taken for granted, but there's an ease of being home. There's the ground I walk in, the mountains, the rivers, the coastline. They've created the people that are my forebears. And I'm home and it's natural to me. And so when I am here, and I wake up and I see the mountain and I hear the languages and I hear the thoughts of accents and I know where I am and I know who I am. And this is a personal thing. It's not to say that I wouldn't take opportunities somewhere else, but I knew that I was at my very best in a place where I felt I belonged. I could do so much more. I could fulfill so much more and grow so much more in a place where I felt connected to my past and to the past of my families and where they come from.
Yeah. Was part of the journey of being comfortable with yourself and who you are also related to sexuality, or you've spoken about the personal side of your life?
Yes, so I am gay, and I left Cape Town at the time when I was 20 years old. I didn't come out, not even to myself. You're still in the stage of, okay, well, just give it a few years, it will come right. Or just keep trying. But in a way, it was also a relief to leave the proud eye, the pride in the best way, the proud eye of my family, the proud eye of my church community. And to go through that self-discovery away from those eyes, so that I wouldn't shame them. And I could, eventually realize that this is who you are. But this is living in the bush. There's very few people. You're wearing khaki and a gun every day. and after 9 years, I felt believe that if I was ever going to meet someone, it wasn't going to be there. And moving to Cape Town was one of the things. It was loneliness, because I was very happy out there. And I took a transfer with Sandbox and I never spoke about that. And one of the reasons was not only to return home, because that wasn't a consideration, that wasn't part of my maturity yet, but also to meet someone. But also coming back older, coming back economically independent, where I wasn't going to be dependent on a family. And yes, and then I did meet one almost 12 years ago, and we are still together. Yeah.
And I mean, was that a struggle with you and your family, with your faith? Was it something you could reconcile easily? You know, was that I guess maybe it was a journey? Do you want to say something about that?
Well, yes. It's different for everyone. I can't really complain about family. It was new for them. There were little hiccups here and there, but they were only here and there. At that time, I was in my 30s. I had become a man. I was economically independent. I had learned to be socially independent, far away from home, and learned to get a backbone, to stand my own ground. So I took very little nonsense.
Which is good, but you also shared, you know, as a child, you were, you know, family was hugely important to you, and it was very much embroiled with church as well. And
because we try and please people, that's our own problem. Because even though we make people proud are proud when you do well.
Yeah.
And when you are honest and you are fearful of not making people proud anymore, but also of shaming people, because you know their community standing, you know their church standing. It was a conflict socially that was within me. Turns out it wasn't really within my family.
That's great.
It was a battle I had to process. It was much more difficult for me to accept myself than it ever was for them. This is the benefit of a continuing conversation. And I came out to my mother over a phone call when I was in Kruger. It was a safe space. It was a safe distance. But then I struggled with it a lot. I tried to reconcile my sexuality to my faith. This was a mistake. This was a grave mistake. Because we are not the ones that effect reconciliation. This is what the cross means. The cross reconciles us to God. All of us. We are not supposed to do the reconciliation work. It's been done. And I needed to, through my struggles and bumping my head and alienating people by withdrawing myself. You know, my family would say, but we never pushed you away. We don't see you.
You were saying before, you know, you learned during that period of being unemployed that people didn't accept you or not accept you or love you
based on that. Yes.
And the same with your sexuality.
Same with my sexual, same thing with being gay. I really can't think of, there's maybe one or two, but maybe they weren't really a big part of my life because memory fails me. But there was no one that actually pushed me away. I removed myself out of fear of conflict, out of shames that I didn't think were there. But in reality, I was the one who removed myself from family because of personal conflicts, because of anticipating conflict.
So you've been with us at RUC now, I think, for a couple of years, something like that?
I started attending here sporadically before I left for Durban, so I can say maybe about 2011. But I more on a regular basis, probably the last 5 years.
Okay.
And super regularly the last 2 years.
Okay.
The time of COVID.
Sure. And what was it that drew you to RUC? You know, why this church? You know, coming from a Seventh-day Adventist background.
Obviously, there was no churches up there, so I had ceased to become a church-going person in a landscape where there were no churches.
You were
in a national
worshipping
park.
in the beauty of creation.
Yes. And coming from a background where church-going and fellowship becomes such a massive part of your life, and when you realize that so much of the enactment of your faith is being part of a community, and now faith had to depend on me, or the practice of my faith had to depend on me alone. I didn't have the benefit of this church community and this family community. We were all going to church together. We were all having lunch afterwards. We were having vespers together in our different homes. That had ceased because I had left. And when I came back, I didn't go back as a child. I now had my own home. So I wasn't part, I had fallen out of that tradition, not the faith, but the tradition. And then, of course, there was the internal struggles and the fear of rejoining a church, because now suddenly I'd come back and I knew I was gay. People knew I was gay. And in that process of, continuing that mistake of pulling myself away, I also pulled myself away from the church. No church ever refused me into. I never gave him a chance. I never walked through the door.
Self-protection.
Self-protection, even in the absence, retrospectively, even in the absence of any kind of assault or rejection, I never let that happen because I withdrew myself. I made a friend in Cape Town many years ago. People all know him, Laurie Gow. And we had extended over the last 2 decades conversations about sexuality and faith. I came from a very, very, very conservative, ultra-Protestant, theological and community background with a certain literalist understanding of the Bible and how we live. And it was a beautiful childhood. It was a wonderful, deeply scriptural rooted childhood that I had and family that I came from. And I'd never change it for the world. Because scripture is embedded in me now, and it always will be because of that kind of strict church-going upbringing. And I struggled. How could I be acceptable to God? How could I call myself a Christian and gay? And later on, I wanted to start attending church. And I spoke to Laurie about it, and he said, well, you live close enough, you live in Observatory. Why don't you try this congregation? They are affirming. I said, what's affirming? Like you're allowed to attend. He said, no, you're just allowed to attend. You can go there. And people of different sexualities are affirmed within their sexualities. Like, you're not a gay member, you're a member, you are gay, and yes, you are gay and you are God's creation, and that is the what can I say? The atmosphere or the decision of that community, of that congregation. And so that's when I came here for the first time. I'm very, very excited. And I enjoyed it. And yes, I had to get back into regular attendance. Not because of any issues with the congregation, just issues of I had fallen out of regular church attendance.
It's a different lifestyle, different rhythms.
Yes.
So you felt comfortable at RUC. I understand now you've become part of the Creation Care group, which is, obviously something fitting your long-standing passions and interests.
Yes.
How's that been for you?
I haven't had a lot of involvement on the committee. I'm a very, very new member.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course, with COVID, the meetings, but I'm very happy to be part of it because it now links me in a very real way. Like I'm part of this congregation. Even though I don't really know many people.
Yeah.
I know the faces and people may know my face.
And I guess the whole fellowship, if you like, community building part has been more difficult with COVID because we've been meeting very rarely, you know, in small numbers. So.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just to finish off with, Glynn, tell us a little bit about, you know, what do you like to do for fun? Who's Glynn outside of, you know, work and relationship? What brings a spark to your eye?
Well, I'm still a nature fanatic. The last 2 years since recovering from my illness has really, I now know how limited our time is and how our physical mobility is not guaranteed. And while we have physical mobility, we must use it to go to places, to climb the mountains, to take road trips to remote places and to look around them. So I love plants, I love flowers, love taking pictures of them. Cape Town is a wonderful place for that. It's unparalleled, including to me, you know, certainly in South Africa. And so I spend a lot of time outside of work in nature, looking for plants. Sometimes after work, definitely on the weekends. But wherever I am, if I see something interesting, I'll go and snap it and try and find out, you know, what it is. I've become affiliated in a very ad hoc way with the work on the Rondebosch Common, with the Friends of the Rondebosch Common group. So I really love the Common. Since getting to know what's actually growing there, I had no idea. Even though I taught at a school on the threshold of the Common, I had no idea that it was a flower paradise. I just thought it was an open field. And then when I started attending these spring walks and I looked around, I could not believe it. So when the flowering season starts, you'll find me there almost every weekend with my hat, nose at ground level, taking pictures or looking for something, scratching the grass or the brush, looking for something. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been fascinating to get to know you better, and I'm sure others in the RUC community will also enjoy that too. And it's another way of us getting to know each other and building community during this time. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant.